Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, the Witkoff Organization, Customers Bank, Ariel Property Advisors, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns. Additional funding has been provided by AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Cohen Equities, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Connect One Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investments, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Polsonelli, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Knackle Group at Cushman & Wakefield, Maring Goff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
The Bronx, New York, Brooklyn, New York, Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to go to Brooklyn College. I'm going to become a teacher. I'm going to be teaching at Lafayette. Nah, you know what? I want to be more of an educator. I want to get more involved. I want to become an educator at a college and a university. I'm going to get my master's. I'm going to get involved with Soviet Jewry. I'm going to get involved with interracial and intercommunity causes. You know what? It's time to write a book. Not one book. 9 books over there, writing books. You know what? I'm going to become a state senator. A state senator? 10-year state senator. More books, new books. Wagner College. I have the infamous, the wonderful, special Seymour Lachman. Thanks for being here.
Okay.
So tell me about your parents, okay? Your father, who we have a wonderful picture in Poland.
Right. He attended a Jewish seminary in higher education. Unfortunately, his parents both died when he was between 21 and 23, before he was married, actually. And that was important in his life because he had to work and he decided to come to America.
You have a picture of your mother, who was a beautiful woman.
Right.
So it was an arranged marriage, I would assume, in Poland?
No.
No.
No, because my mother and father, it was partially arranged, but they were together, and they decided separately and together that they wanted to marry each other. So they were introduced by members of their families.
So they were introduced, they get married, they come over in 1922 on the boat. They end up initially in the Bronx because your father had an uncle.
An uncle.
An uncle who was here. And from the Bronx, they moved to Brooklyn. Where were you living when you were living in Brooklyn originally?
We were living in East New York, and I graduated from Thomas Jefferson High School, which was the local high school, and went to Brooklyn College. At that time, Brooklyn College was affordable because there was no tuition.
But when you were growing up, did you have any idea that you would become an educator, a college professor? I mean, the dean of the City University of New York, the Graduate Center. What brought you to get involved with education?
I like to work with people as well as with ideas. And I felt the ideal situation for me would be as an educator and as an academic.
Now, your father, you said to me, was a presser, right?
Yeah, he was.
He had a candy store once.
Yeah, and it
then the
folded up
Depression
during the
came in.
Depression.
During the
But
Depression.
that was before my memory, and that was over with, and he became a presser in a clothing factory where he worked on 5 steam machines at the same time.
Now, something you said to me was important, how your father got his citizenship. He read a book, which was one page in English, one page was in Yiddish. Tell me about the book.
Well, first of all, my father was the first person I ever met who was fluent in 6 languages. I have difficulty with 3 languages. And he didn't have a formal education. And he was a student of, as well as rabbinics, of history, of political science, and he decided to become an American citizen as soon as possible. So he took out this book by a professor of history at that time, and one page of the book was in English, and it was edited, so the other page was in Yiddish. So he read it in Yiddish and learned how to speak English by looking at the other side. And one of the 6 languages he was fluent in was English.
So you go to Brooklyn College.
Right.
And you graduate what year from Brooklyn College?
I think it was 56.
So at that time, in 1956, you then get a job at Jefferson or at Lafayette High School?
I spent 1 year at Jefferson, and I think a year and a half at Lafayette. And I did this because I wanted to get my doctorate. And I got my doctorate from NYU.
So you enrolled at NYU?
Yes, and I had to, no, this was a college, a university with tuition. So I had to make some money, and at that time I thought I would be able to do that and enjoy my occupation.
Now, during that period of time, we have the picture of you and Eleanor Roosevelt. Tell me about that.
Well, it's interesting
in the
that you
same
were able
period.
to recognize me. I was 27 at the time, and I helped form an amity club that brought different people together in a diverse area of Lafayette High School, which was primarily Bensonhurst then, and people who joined this club were Italian Americans, Jewish Americans, Irish Americans, African Americans, Latinos, and the objective was to learn more about each individual as well as the groups that they were in. We gave Eleanor Roosevelt an award, which her chief of staff, I think it was last year of her life, she must have been in her 80s at the time, and her chief of staff said she would never accept an invitation at her stage in life to go from Manhattan's Upper East Side to Brooklyn. And I said, she can tell me that when she responds to my letter. I sent her a letter, and I was shocked to discover that she did accept. But she asked me for a favor. She said she doesn't know Brooklyn at all, and her driver doesn't know Brooklyn at all. So how does she get to Bensonhurst in Brooklyn? We had a car pick her up. And it's amazing because there were conservatives and there were liberals and centrists at that time in the audience. I think Lafayette was a school of about 3,000 students, so you had faculty, administrators. At the end of her speech, 100% of the people in the audience just stood up and didn't stop applauding. It was an amazing reception. And afterwards, the plaque she received, we discovered went into the FDR library in Hyde Park, the Eleanor Roosevelt wing.
So you get your degree, your PhD.
Right.
And is that when you get the job at the Board of Education?
That came later. I received my degree, and I have to thank my wife for that because she received a scholarship to get her PhD degree at the University of Pennsylvania, but for some reason she deferred that I would go first because of the young children we had at the time, and she eventually received her PhD in sociology from NYU, and also was a professor at CUNY. But she deferred this to me, and I don't know why. Well, I do know why. She's a wonderful lady. All my good traits are from my wife and my parents. The other traits are from me directly. And believe it or not, the first position after my PhD was as a Assistant National Director of Religious Affairs for the ADL. And where I thought I would be happy doing,
community service.
That's right. And still in my 20s at the time. And then I met the president-to-be of Kingsborough Community College, Jack Hartstein, and he said, how would you like to become an assistant professor at a college that we're opening up?
Right, but this wasn't the Kingsborough in Manhattan Beach.
No.
This was the Kingsborough in mid-Brooklyn.
That's right.
Which subsequently became
Medgar College. Rudy Crew, who used to be a chancellor at the Board of Education, is now the president of that college. It was a totally different population. And I enjoyed relating to them. I mean, I was still a kid learning the ropes, and I got to know Shirley Chisholm when she ran for Congress. We invited her to come down. Again, it was an inter-ethnic, interracial, wonderful experience.
So how does the dean at the mid-Brooklyn campus of Kingsborough get subsequently to downtown Brooklyn at the Board of Education?
It was a great surprise and shock to me. I received a call from the person, a well-known judge who was advising the borough president. The board had changed. It had been centralized. But because of a feud between Lindsay and who was mayor and Governor Rockefeller at that time, which exploded with Ocean Hill-Brownsville, et cetera, they decided to give the power, minor power to the mayor and major powers to the borough president. And this distinguished judge advised the mayor, who was in his 80s, running for re-election against a 32-year-old assemblyman who I knew, that if he wants to win, he has to get somebody who's young, the same age as as his opponent in the borough presidential race, and that there are two other qualities. He shouldn't have ever been involved in elementary and secondary education and in the Ocean Hill-Brownsville conflict. I was, at that time, within 3 years, I became dean of the Mid-Brooklyn campus and a full professor. At that time, it was much easier to rise when these new colleges opened up.
So how do you
But the most important thing is you have to appoint somebody who no one ever heard of before in the outside world. And I really fit that category.
So you hit the appropriate character.
That's right.
But that's how you entered the Board of Ed. But how did you become the president of the Board of Ed?
How did I become Brett? My colleagues wanted me to become president of the Board of Ed. A year before I did, I worked part-time at the Board of Ed, and I also accepted a position at the American Jewish Committee as Director of Foreign Affairs. And I really had a difficult choice at the end of the year deciding what I wanted to do. Remain at the AJ Committee and perhaps eventually become the head of it, or become president of the Board of Ed.
I think you made the right decision.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so you become president of the Board of Ed. So how do you leave the Board of Ed and then get involved with the City University again, but now in a different role?
I stayed at the Board of Ed for 5 years. And the Board of Ed at that time was similar to the state legislature in the sense that there was a whole tumult about where we should go, what we should do, what in terms of decentralizing or re-centralizing the community districts as well as the special districts that had existed with community control. And after 5 years, I felt I had, paid my dues, so to speak. And then I returned to the City University of New York and taught at part-time at Brooklyn and then full-time at Baruch College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York.
Now, the Graduate Center, when do you become the university dean?
I became the University Dean of CUNY in the mid-1980s, and I served as University Dean until I retired. When a special election arose for the state senate.
So you stay into here. We have a picture of you at the Graduate Center with Prashansky,
Right.
who was the head of the Graduate Center at this time. And when did you write your first book? As I was saying,
I
like
wrote
the
my
children
first
age.
book at the Board of Education, and then I continued writing different books afterwards and editing books, etc.
So it's 1996. An opening happens in Albany. There's an opportunity for a state senator. You had been political. You were involved with Soviet Jewry. We have the picture over there with many distinguished people on that.
And the National Collaborative Public Non-Public Schools.
Right, and also, the trip to Russia and all the other pictures. But how do you decide at that time of your career, to make a new move?
Well, I was in my late 50s at the time, and I had some gripes about politics, but I said to myself, the problem is that when there are issues that become national or state problems, most people say, you can't change it, to hell with it, we have to accept this, and we'll go on our own merry way. I actually thought that the theory of government that I taught at the Graduate Center and at Baruch College was the reality of government. Until I was elected in the special election in 1996. And I discovered quite the contrary.
So it's 1996. Now you're living in Brooklyn at this time. Susan is a psychologist.
No, sociologist.
Sociologist. And you're in Albany, what, 2
And the kids are getting married. Yeah.
Right, and we have a picture of the 25th anniversary photo of the family with your mother-in-law.
Right.
So what, you spend 2 days a week in Albany, or?
Well, actually, it was 2 days, 3 days, and the month of March was 3 or 4 days. That's when the budget had to be adopted. When it wasn't adopted, when I was there under different governors on time. And that's one of the things that Andrew Cuomo has accomplished, and it's a major accomplishment, except this year it's a little bit late, but it's understandable because he is dealing with a legislature where the democratic process does not exist as much as it did in the past.
What happens in 2006? You're there for 10 years. They changed your district a little, redistricting.
Yeah, but that was a blessing in disguise because I had turned down, legislators get member items. My member items were 139,000. And the majority leader at that time was Senator Joe Bruno. His deputy was Dean Scalos, who was recently indicted and found guilty of a felony and is appealing to the courts. Joe Bruno and Governor Pataki surprised me one day when they said that I was the type of person that could become a centrist Republican, and I wouldn't have to change parties, but vote for the Republican candidate for majority leader, and or join the Republican conference, that I would be rewarded by between $2 and $2.5 million in member items for my district, and I would have the perfect district tailor-made for me. And he must have been stunned when I refused to accept. And I told him that, look, someday I might vote for a Republican or agree with moderate Republicans' bills, but I can't accept it. He said, why? I said, it's against my conscience. And I walked out of the room. And there was another senator waiting outside who was a Democrat from Brooklyn who said, did you say yes or no? I didn't realize he even knew I was in there. And I said, no, Carl. And he ran into the majority leader's office.
And he took the job.
He took the job. And unfortunately, he did
spending
some
some-
illegal things, and
Right.
he's spending time.
He's on the vacation. So 2000.
But you know why I said it's a blessing in disguise? Because in order, they didn't give me a perfect district in their eyes, but in my eyes, it became a perfect district because I represented the North Shore of Staten Island.
Which was very worthwhile. You came back. You went to Adelphi a little while.
Yeah,
as a professor.
while I was there, a distinguished
Right.
visiting professor.
Professor at
of
Adelphi,
government.
and then you got to Wagner.
Right. I established the Carey Institute, named after
Carey.
Governor Carey, to reform state government.
So how did you decide to write the book about Hugh Carey?
Because he was a mentor of mine. When he was my congressman, believe it or not, when I lived in Bensonhurst. And I became close to him and supported him wholeheartedly when he ran for governor. And then he did something that very few people were able to do, and that is New York State, and because of New York City, were having major financial problems. And he changed things during his 2 terms in office. And New York did not become bankrupt. And they didn't have friends in the White House at that time. New York survived because of Hugh Carey. And I said, and this man also brought federal aid to education to the federal government. For 100 years, American educators wanted to have federal aid to education, and they couldn't. Why? Because many Protestant senators, not all U.S. senators, and some Catholic U.S. senators couldn't agree on the church-state issue. And he was a congressman then in the House Ways and Means Committee and brought about a compromise that LBJ, President Johnson, accepted.
So that was one book. Then you wrote a book about Lou Rudin.
Yes.
Why'd you write the book about Rudin?
One error that I did in writing the Carey book is I didn't put into perspective what people who were not in government could do to aid New York from avoiding bankruptcy. Not just the business leaders or the union leaders like Shanker and Gottbaum, but like Lou Rudin. And Bill Rudin is a friend of mine, his son, and he suggested that he'd like to have something written about his father. I said, let me do some research first. And I discovered that, the New York Marathon, which was confined to Central Park in Manhattan, became a 5-borough event.
Right, and the Association for a Better New York.
Association for Better New York, when the mayor at that time disapproved because of a movie that didn't place New York in a good light. In terms of movies, he wanted to get rid of movies in New York, and now it's a tremendous money. And Lou Rudin was able to convince the mayor to do that. Bulletproof vests.
No
The
question.
government wasn't paying police officers
Now,
to get bulletproof vests. Rudin
then about,
suggested it.
was 2010 you wrote 3 Men?
3 Men in a Room, I wrote in 2007 or 8 it was
Okay,
published.
2007, right. So now this year you just came out with a new book called Failed State,
Yeah.
which is like a revised edition of 3 Men.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about this book.
Well, the need
Sure.
for the book became embedded in my mind because of the worst things that were happening. Legislators who were initially doing things that I considered unethical became illegal. They crossed the line. Why did they cross the line? Because in the New York State Legislature, which is one of the worst in the nation, and it used to be one of the best in the nation, you have almost absolute power given to two people, the Senate Majority Leader and the New York and the Speaker of the Assembly. One a Republican historically and one a Democrat. What do I mean by almost absolute power? We don't write the budget. I was on the budget committee. We didn't involve ourselves in writing it. The leaders and their staff prepare a budget, and they expect us to approve the budget. And they don't permit us to change any provisions of the budget, and they give us a half hour to read a 2,000-page phone directory that's called a budget, and then we have to vote. So, look, the leadership appoints the chairs, the leader of each committee, and they get perks, 30, 40, 50,000 for that.
See, but my viewers are going to have a great opportunity when they read the book. because we have to, with like a minute and a half less, we have to talk. You're married how many years?
I'm married over 50 years to Susan. I have a couple of children.
You have a son who was a rabbi in Baltimore.
Yes, he's the dean of a seminary, the Friedman Colale of Greater Washington.
Right, and you have a daughter.
My daughter is a social worker. We've been blessed with a large number of grandchildren.
You have about 11, I think?
Yes, as of now,
So
we have 11.
We have that picture over there with grandchildren, right?
Yes.
So I'd say for the kid who grew up, or who was born in the Bronx, who lived his entire life, most of it, until recently, the last, how many years in Manhattan?
2 years, 2.5 years ago.
You know what? The kid did well, and more important, he's a real mensch, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much, but I owe all this to my parents and to my wife.